Thank you all for joining the DBLAC Reading Series virtual book chat with Dr. Ersula Orr, author of Lynching, Violence, Rhetoric, and American Identity. I'm LeTriece Calhoun. I'm a fourth-year PhD student here at the University of Pittsburgh with a focus in Black women's ordinary writing and rhetoric. And this is my co-moderator.
Hi, my name is D'Angelo Bridges. Hey, Dr. Orr.
Hey. Will I see you again soon?
Yes, you will. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Yes. So I'm a PhD student at Penn State studying 19th century African-American rhetoric and literature and culture.
Awesome. So about DBLAC, DBLAC, it stands for Digital Black Lit, Literature and Literacies and Composition. It's an educational nonprofit as of June 19th, 2019. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'll clap for you. This organization acts as a learning community and pipeline for professional development, networking, and resource pooling aimed at academic introduction and retention for fields related to language and composition, including, but not limited to, literacy studies, literature, writing studies, rhetoric, creative writing, and digital humanities. The organization is structured as a network of members who self-identify as Black and/or who support Black education, ranging in ranks from senior faculty, junior faculty, graduate students, advanced undergrad students, high school students, and with and in other professional and other community groups for the purpose of mentoring and the continued success of a family line of scholars. DBLAC's mission is rooted in direct support for Black students, but we offer several open opportunities for connections and coalition building that model Black feminist and communal practices.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Orr. Ersula Orr is the Lincoln Professor of Ethics in the School of Social Transformation and Assistant Professor of African and African American Studies and Rhetoric at Arizona State University. Her work as a race-critical rhetorician maps the suasive strategies of aggrieved communities as they operate within a post-emancipation historical context. In Lynching, Violence, Rhetoric, and American Identity, Orr examines lynching as a rhetorical strategy and material practice interwoven with the formation of America's national identity and with the nation's need to continually renew that identity. Specifically, the book draws connections between the rhetorics and material practices of lynching in the past and the forms these rhetorics and practices assume in the present, with the hope of helping readers understand, interpret, and even critique present-day situations involving racial violence. Dr. Orr's most recent publications broadly explore the correlations between race, power, and academic space, and give practical attention to the rhetorical strategies Black and non-Black writers of color use when navigating social space. Publications exploring these issues include Communication and Critical/Cultural Studies, Pedagogy, Critical Approaches to Teaching Literature, Language, Composition, and Culture, Present Tense, and Rhetorics of Whiteness, Post-Racial Hauntings in Popular Culture, Social Media, and Education. Dr. Orr is the 2018 College of Global Health Graduate Mentorship Award recipient, a 2013 Institute for Humanities Research Fellow at Arizona State University, and a 2011 Penn State Alumni Association Dissertation Award recipient. So she has done a lot of work. And she's one of my, good friends.
So for the format of this talk, we will pose 4 questions to Dr. Orr, and we'll take a couple of questions from the local audience, so these awesome people here, and a couple of questions from our virtual audience. So please feel free to tweet about the book chat using the hashtags #DBLAC, so that's DBLAC, reading series, all one word, and #DBLAC reads lynching. So I'm excited. Are we ready to get started? Yeah. Okay. All right, Dr. Orr, can you please share with us your motivation behind this project?
Really, it was just about tracing a history, tracing a logic, what I've been calling critical democratic literacy, which is the way that Black folks read what America means for them. The lived experience of democracy within a Black body is completely different from the normalized understanding and larger narratives of progress that perpetuate a notion that we are beyond racism, we are beyond race, that to bring up issues of the past is to ignite a past that no longer exists and doesn't have any bearing or any impact upon the present. And the other motivation really was, I wanted my nieces and my nephews and my godchildren to understand America's ways, to have sort of kind of a textbook, a handbook, really, for reading what citizenship and democracy meant for them.
That's wonderful.
Okay, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could share with us a bit about your writing process for a topic of such importance, but also heaviness and relatedness or connection to many lives, to so many lives, I mean.
Writing process. Real talk, I write in public spaces. And it depends upon what I guess what stage of the writing process that I'm in. But I write best in really crowded, really loud, cacophonous spaces. So typically I write at bars. And I'm the chick in the corner at a particular place that everybody knows my name, and I really don't know anybody else because I'm just the random Black chick in the corner, you know, with all the right making that hat. It's like that's who I am. People in Baltimore know me as that. People out here in Phoenix know me as that. When I was in grad school, I wrote my dissertation at Zeno's. Zeno's is a bar. Spilling all my tea today. Zeno's is a bar, or world-renowned bar in a valley that's not so happy. And so in order to manage that valley that's not so happy, I spent a lot of time at that bar during the hours when it was closed. I bartended my way through college, so I have a certain relationship with restaurateurs and whatnot. So during the times when they were closed was the time when I sat and write because there was nobody there. So I got in about between 8 and 11 o'clock in the morning. I sat at the bar and I wrote. And then all the patrons come in and then I leave. And I go find another spot. When it came to certain parts of the book, specifically just trying to unpack what lynching meant, that's been a constant struggle. That struggle includes procrastination and avoidance. That struggle includes really, really fucking ugly cries. That struggle includes being triggered by so many things that you thought that you had built up a tolerance for. And I say a tolerance, not in the sense that it doesn't affect you, but a tolerance so that it doesn't interrupt your ability to put one foot in front of the other. The condition of being Black in America means that you're always interrupted, which means you're always overseen, which means that your body precedes you before you actually get into that space, right? You know that already, right? You have made it this far, prayerfully, with some of that knowledge in your mind. There are times where the remembrance of that or the reminder of that and other ways that maybe you hadn't really imagined or hadn't really been up to just really kind of snatch your feet from underneath you. So the writing process was a real struggle because I was so intimately involved with the project before my assault. After the assault, I couldn't write. I couldn't think, I couldn't read. I couldn't see anything. And that was like a really, really dark place. Writing myself out of that dark place, that required 3 different therapists. That required anti-anxiety medication. That required owning my assault. And a shit ton of yoga. And I will preach the yoga every day about the importance of whatever your church is, find your church home. Whether that be outside in nature, whether that be you taking quiet time for yourself, whatever way you establish peace, make that a daily routine. Because you can't survive doing the kind of work we do if you don't have some kind of place of sanctuary that you created for yourself. And I don't just mean the ones that were created for you, but I mean the ones that you have to develop as you go through the motions. That was an extended response, but yeah.
That was perfect. That was perfect, especially because like I had a question of what are your methods towards self-care, especially in dealing with this sort of work? And you just rolled right into it. That was excellent. I think it's very important, especially in the work that we do as Black scholars, to, as you said, establish peace in the daily routine. I think that's incredible.
And I have to also say, you know, what I've completely failed to include in this, because I don't think about this as part of the writing routine or writing process, but it's always there. My support network, my community, my friends, my fam who hold me down, those who are blood and not blood. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. And I mean that in so many transparent ways, I would not be here. So in knowing that I had support and knowing that people didn't think that I was crazy, didn't think that I was mentally ill, didn't think for the 3 years before I got assaulted, where I kept saying something's going to happen, I can feel it. If I don't pay attention, I'll get snatched up in a way that I can't get back from. Like I kept saying this for the good 3 years. People were like, some people were saying, you're starting to make me a little nervous. Maybe you should leave Arizona. Maybe you should stop working on the work you're working on. Maybe all this work in racialized violence is really starting to get to you. I mean, I had those kind of comments. And then the thing about it is the shit does get to you. How can it not get to you? If it doesn't fucking get to you, then you're not human. You know, and if it doesn't fucking get to you, then there's a certain kind of racialized status that I assume that you operate under, and a logic that you hold that you don't get. And so without them, I wouldn't have been able to get back on the horse, really. And I mean, when I think about on the horse, I think about modes of mobility, right? And I think about how our bodies are constantly stopped. You're stopped in the classroom. You're stopped before you even get the opportunity to go into the classroom, right? You're stopped. You can't even cross the damn street and you stop, right? You raise your hand and nobody calls you. That's another form of stoppage. Like I think about all the modes of interruption and our abilities to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And how thankful I am for the village that I have and that I've been able to cultivate and that I've been blessed with, who hear me when I speak and don't immediately dismiss me as crazy. And when things come to pass, and they always do, they're like, all right, you know, you were running your mouth for all this time, and I've learned to not say anything and just wait till it comes to pass. All I can say is thank you for those who didn't treat me like I was crazy. All I can say is thank you for those who helped me out. All I can say is thank you for those who spoke for me when I had no capacity to speak for myself. That is part of the writing process, because I couldn't speak, I couldn't think, I couldn't write. So in a lot of ways, my community ended up being my voice. So I must acknowledge them.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about the writing process is kind of connected to community care as well, like and being a sense of like uplift for the community in the ways in which someone like Anna Julia Cooper or Frederick Douglass were doing, right? Like thinking about how we can build up the community through our writing and through the writing process, as we are sort of thinking and analyzing the ways in which Black bodies are racialized and the ways in which Black bodies experience violence in the various, you know, ways that we do.
Right. A phrase that I always use is walking alongside. I'll say to people or my students, this is a trip. You know what I'm saying? You can roll with me, or you can choose not to. It's completely up to you. You can jump off the path whenever you want to. You can jump back on whenever you need to. But I just want to say thank you for walking alongside me, because I always think about it in terms of mobility. I think about learning, education, sharing, fellowship, in terms of mobility. So that in the sense that even though we've been locked down and stopped, we've been anchored in ways not of our choosing, we still remain in motion. The ability to think and to share those thoughts, that's liberation right there. That's freedom right there. And that's the shit that scares motherfuckers right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. It reminds me of a text our former scholar in residence, Dr. Beverly Moss, said, or she wrote last year, the community text, and thinking about how we create those communities and how they foster that sort of perseverance within us. And I think
testimony is everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough thing to do. It's extremely tough. So we're glad that you've been able to get through it with your community, and you're able to foster a community like this, especially with DBLAC, because these are some excellent scholars here. And we're pumped. We're so pumped.
Quietly, I'm like, oh, they doing some cool shit. Sorry. I'm not jealous because like I'm a little ahead. And you know, if I was young, I'd be rolling with them, but they at least I'm like, hey!
Roll with us anyway.
I want to roll with you, be cool with you, be good with you.
Awesome. So we're gonna shift to our next question. This was, I think, drafted by me. How does viral social media sharing of contemporary lynching, so thinking of Bland, Castile, Eric Garner, fit into the concept of what you said is multimodal public memory and American lynching?
So in the same way that the civil rights movement was televised for the nation, and it seared within that generation a certain kind of mediated memory of democracy in the 60s and the 70s. I understand the mediated castings of Black Death now in the 21st century as a continuation of that form. But in ways that perpetuate the spectacle, as opposed to the attempt to cultivate a critical kind of morality, right? A critical response to a lack of morality, right? Or to an immorality that has been normalized. I don't see that happening today with the way that we recirculate contemporary images of lynching. They literally are, in my mind's eye, modern day lynching postcards, modern day lynching photographs that are circulated under different circumstances, but nonetheless still constitute a certain kind of spectacle public, both the spectacle public and I will argue a mourning public. And that mourning public is the public that I see doing kind of the critical political work, right? Because Black liberation is very much constituted through suffering. And it is very much, it has been activated time and time again through the mourning of Black women, specifically Black mothers. And so to see those connections and one, to know that history, and then to be able to, I don't want to say be able to, but reliving that history in a way undermines arguments about the past being the past, about us being over racism, about these things not existing. And it further, for me, materializes what we've always said about the changing saying: the more things change, the more they stay the same. Just because you say that, you know, lynching doesn't exist anymore because you change the definition to mean this, doesn't mean that it still doesn't persist. Just because we call police officers, or we call officers police officers because they're in uniforms, doesn't mean that those blue bodies don't carry the same power as white bodies, right? They don't carry the same power and the same ability to kill with impunity, you know, as a white hood. So the question ends up being, what's the difference between a white hood and a blue uniform? When they end up residing in the same, and producing the same form of social death, both material and social death. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
I think you did.
You did.
Yeah. Yeah, and to sort of, I guess, elaborate from that as well, I'm curious to know what you think about the mothers of these victims, asking people to not share these videos. What does that do for us as a community? Does that limit us? Do we respect their well, of course we want to respect their wishes, but if these videos sort of adhere to what you call like the public memory, what do we do with that space?
That's a really hard question for me. A couple years back, I invited Leslie McSpadden out, and we had this symposium. Leslie McSpadden is the mother of Michael Brown. And she had, the first thing she said to me, she said, do you know that the last day of my son's birth, the last birthday my son had was the day, 2 days before you got assaulted and arrested, almost lost your life. We talked about Michael, and we talked about her frustration over what she felt like was the community capitalizing upon her son's death.
Yeah.
What she hadn't communicated to me was she hadn't said anything about the circulation of the image, right? Although I know that this is something that's been asked for. And to that point, yes, definitely honoring it. But part of my question has to do with how do we maintain the memory? Because this is critically important to our survival. So if we don't recirculate the image, then will that be deep, in-depth descriptions of these moments of terror? Is that how we share this information? Is that the way we honor and respect what has been requested by these mothers of the movement? Because for me, the memory can't die. And if we don't testify to the truth of the past, then it does die. And so we don't recognize its reverberation in the present, and we don't have an understanding or an ability to kind of cut it off or to suffocate it, so that it doesn't have such a potent presence, in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an extremely tough question. And I think a lot of scholars who deal with this sort of work, including yourself, have to navigate those weird spaces, those complex and messy and tangled spaces. And especially when it comes from a tradition of thinking back to Emmett Till and his open casket and it being circulated, I think in Jet magazine.
Yeah.
I think my grandmother still has a copy of that, just to remind ourselves, remind our family, remind our young boys in the family what can happen and the history of violence.
And see, the thing about it is that, like, the state didn't want Mammy to do that. She was explicitly told by Mississippi officials not to open the casket.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a testimony to a certain kind of evidence. Like, I'm thinking about the rhetorical context that occasions her to make the decision that she makes to let the world see. Compared to now, it is a proliferation of what we already know. So it's more of a spectacleizing of this violence, right? Of this death. And maybe it's partly has to do with the sheer volume. Whereas in 1955, we have an isolated incident.
Mm-hmm.
And then throughout time, we see it, but it's not as compressed as it's been for the last, 7 years, let's say. I don't know, maybe that has some kind of bearing on it to a certain extent, because I wonder if it was just maybe 1 or 2, maybe the request would be different.
Mm.
Maybe not. I really don't know. I have no sense, and I don't want to assume, but I'm just thinking, given the comparison you drew between Mammy Till Mobley and contemporary mothers today, they're motivated by similar impetuses, but also different circumstances and contexts. So, and for Mimi, it was about getting justice, because she wasn't going to get justice. And not to say that these mothers have gotten justice either, but there has been a redress in ways that Mammy has not received yet, and that Emmett has not received yet.
I was thinking, as you were talking about the differences between Black memory and white memory in these cases, so how white folks attempt to remember lynching by disassociation, like saying, lynching or police violence is not the same thing as lynching, versus how Black people are making these strong, connections and saying, I see these connections. It's the same kind of police violence that undergirds both systems of, It's the same thing. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you're seeing the Black memory in this case and white memory, I guess, in this case.
White memory is about absolving itself of shame and accountability and responsibility. White memory is national memory. Am I lying?
No.
You're preaching.
So like, what was so significant about the work of anti-lynching activists and about activists today is the models of complicity that they draw, right? And how those models of complicity, you know, worry the nation to the point where they say, look, we don't want to attend to this anymore. What we want to do now, we want to say, hey, this doesn't exist anymore. This doesn't happen anymore because America is about progress. And if we can't push this progress narrative, then anybody else that we want to come over here because we need their labor, we need their, you know, their income, we need whatever they want to bring to us, right? So we can capitalize upon that. We can't get an influx of individuals, an influx of bodies, if we continue to present ourselves as a nation that is not inclusive, that doesn't recognize its inherent contradictions, and that can't market itself as creating the conditions of possibility for non-Black, for non-white individuals, right? Like that is, I think about, it sounds so jaded, but I think about America as like this big advertisement company. And I think about all the slogans they put out, right? And I think about the function and the purpose of those slogans and how they kind of change over time. I am currently struggling to write an article as we speak about the continuity, about the temporalities of violence, and about how lynching memorials, and I write about this a little bit in the book, but I have a whole section where I fleshed it out elsewhere, but I didn't put it in the book, and now I'm trying to struggle to build it up some. But basically how lynching memorials, and also, you know, literary imagination, even though the nation has chosen to forget lynching because it shames the nation and it undermines its national narrative of progress, there's always been a robust, persistent remembering of lynching among Blacks, because to remember is to survive. To live again, to retell the story, right? Or to at least have somebody write down your story, or to remember your story so that it can be told and passed on. That's the experiential knowledge that you might not actually have, but that you will use to keep yourself safe as you navigate the ways that America is going to kill you. So I think I'm actually getting off topic with the question, but I'll finish with this one point about, for me, the significance of lynching memorials is that they concretize and materialize and work to normalize Black memory in ways that national/white memory has been normalized. But they do so in a kind of counter-memorial, counter-temporality, right? Whereas the discourse that says that lynching is over, that it's ended, that it's done, that it's, you know, a time in the past that has no bearing on the present, that discourse relegates racialized violence to a particular moment. And by doing that, it also relegates Black bodies to a particular moment, like to a past that's not really their past, but a past that they keep reliving because they're Black. And because racism is about relocating, you know, contemporary Black bodies in the past. I'm going somewhere and I'm lost now, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you so much.
This is an example of the writing process. Part of the writing process is, hey, I got this idea, I'm struggling. Let me just kick this real quick, and I'm just throwing up on the page out loud, right? And you let me know, does that make sense? Did you see a connected thread? Because I can't see it right now. Like that, and my community helped me with that, because when you're riddled with forms of trauma and guilt about being alive and surviving a near-death experience, like, you can't think. So a lot of what you say is what I always say. I have to open the page first so I can, like, get anything out. I had no page to throw up on because I literally could not write. All I could do was just have verbal diarrhea all the time. So if my community was not there to suffer through that verbal diarrhea and help me make means and sense out of it and it really was like, when you look at a refrigerator and it has all those words, you know something of serious magnitude is there, but you need help. That's the writing process. That's what I'm experiencing with y'all right now.
Absolutely. We're glad to be your fridge.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you just to sort of, I guess, revert back, just you talking about temporality and materiality and concreteness of lynching memorials reminds me of the Moores Ford lynching reenactment that happens every year, and how it's like a conscious effort to place those past Black bodies in the present.
Right.
Yeah, like that's a fascinating sort of thing compared to the edifices like in Alabama, that it's actually like a lived reconstruction of a traumatic moment and a moment of trauma in the community. I think that's what I'm getting from what you're.
No, you're completely right. I think about the lynching memorial in Montgomery. I mean, these are literal bodies that have been materialized, right? I think it's interesting in the way that lynching strips the humanity of Black subjects, right? Rendering them complete objects, right? A thing, a tool. Whereas the memorial takes that thing, that tool, that item that we actually have always used to do a certain kind of work, and asks us to reclaim that as human. And literally reclaim that as in taking that from Montgomery and taking it back to whatever respective town or state where a lynching occurred, right? There's something about that inversion that I don't really know what it is, but I'm attracted to it. I'm attracted to it. I guess maybe partly because it's got me thinking about how we personify resources to make arguments for protections. Like I'm thinking about the argument for, we will argue that water has human rights. So if we make the argument that water has human rights, then we have to protect it as we would a human, right? And I kind of feel like there's something, I don't know what this is. I'm please continue to walk with me because this is my struggle bug right now. I'm trying to think this through, help me think this through, y'all, please. But there's something interesting, something attractive to me about that flip, that inversion. And maybe it's because Black folks stay putting shit on their heads, you know what I'm saying, in order to get by and get over. And maybe that's just what I'm stuck with. The humanizing of a material item, and specifically the ways that basically you're saying, white America, you don't see us as human. So take this non-human object and make this human. And maybe then you can see us in, I feel like there's an inversion it's a way of addressing the lack of humanity or the stripping of humanity through getting white folks to make a connection to an inanimate object first. I don't know. Because I think part of it has to do with empathy. If they don't see us in them, then how do we make them see us in them? And maybe the detachment, because I don't see an actual body, and I'm allowed to actually also imagine to some regards. Maybe that builds a greater sense of complicity and onus, and a desire for redress. Because what we're talking about is the ability for memorial to create a sense of guilt and shame and complicity and accountability that motivates a public who has chosen to do not a damn thing. Do something. Like, that's some powerful shit.
Yeah. I think we probably need to shift to the next question.
Sorry.
But no, this is perfect. I just want to say that it sounds like when you're talking about the materials reclaiming humanity or humanity existing, I guess, in the material form, it sounds like these memorials, these objects are a way of like white abjection of the Black body by furthering removing the body.
Yes, the body can't be present. The body cannot be present.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm mad excited right now. But yeah, like that's because they can't see us. There's something about seeing us that just rips the power, the rhetorical power away. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, as like a hard transition, I guess.
I forgot.
to our next question. Our next question is, if we take as a given that Black life begins in this space of civic estrangement, what are the rhetorical potentials for resistance? Or is Black people's survival the most salient form of resistance to white supremacism?
That's a whole book.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all.
Talk on these questions by yourself.
So I'll be
good.
the first to say, and this is a non-Judeo-Christian, foundation, like positionality, but I always had the option to opt out.
Mhm.
There might not be no boat, but there's a ledge I can jump off of at any time. Like real talk. You know what I'm saying? So at the same exact time where I think about suffering and survival, I think about my willingness to suffer, to survive. I don't know, I guess right now, you asked the question, I really just kind of got stuck. I literally saw myself on the boat with my child making this decision. Like, that's literally where I was. And I think partly because last year I was teaching, what's my girl's name? Simone Brown.
Dark Matters.
Dark Matters, yeah.
Because I'm working through this larger project about civility while Black and female. And it's sitting at the intersections of race, gender, and surveillance studies. And when I was reading the book, it reminded me, yes, you always had this choice. You've been working to deny yourself this choice, because at times you feel like entertaining this choice means that you're weak, means that maybe you're not Black, right? Means that, yeah, really that you're weak or that you're not Black. That's pretty much as far as I've gotten. And so I get stuck because I really have historically been in places where I have worked to not make that decision. And ASU was the second place in my life where I said, well, I cannot give the university, AKA the nation, because this is a plantation. I am resting upon a plantation within a plantation, right? I cannot give the university / the nation / this plantation the satisfaction of knowing that it's almost killed me. I'll take my own life before I let that be, the conclusion to my narrative. Like, for me, the ability to do that means that I have a level of agency that America says that I don't. Yeah. And so at times I think about the possibility. I think about what death means as a future position, particularly if we think about afterlife, right? And I don't mean this simply from a spiritual or religious standpoint. I mean from a basic interjected, like energy based. Like, if E equals MC squared, right? And energy is never lost and gained, then like, where do we go? Where does that knowledge, where does that information, what is that experience, where does that go? I know I'm going on a completely different plane at this point, but like, it's really a thought that I have that helps me think through, what decision will I make today? Will I, be on one today or not? I will say this, because I guess I'm kind of stuck with your question. I'm not fully answering it because I'm really stuck on the thing about Black death. Particularly because I keep going, I'm working on the Sandra Bland piece. And the question of, did she commit suicide or was she killed? And for me, it's a moot fucking point, because racism killed her ass. So why are we sitting here debating? Let's talk about how I guess for me, the discourses that constitute her guilt and scapegoat her in ways that dismiss, the state's hand in her death, in ways that dismiss racism's hand in her death, in ways that, just allow the nation to exercise a level of disavow. And I kind of partly want to, I've been struggling to think through how suicide in a white supremacist world is an option that some of us may have, an option of freedom. That connects us to a historical past that isn't supposed to have any kind of bearing upon the present. Which goes back to the argument about Blacks are always sequestered to, you know, what some scholars of memory have been talking about as a closed past, because they can't get past racism. Racism is not a past, it's a present and a future. And for me, critical democratic literacy anticipates that future. So by sharing with each other the history of the past about how America's ways, right, work for Black folks, I am preparing the future for what's to come next, because I know the change is same, but the change is same.
So yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking, this idea of death as a rhetorical action. And it's so interesting for you to sort of bring that up, even though we don't necessarily always imagine resistance coming through death, or like our suicide as a,
but we have these narratives. Like we have these narratives in Black literary imagination. I mean, real talk. You know what, beloved. You know what I mean? She didn't get a chance to take herself, but we all understand that, right? We understand why she did what she did, right? And we understand the consequences of what she's done as well, as does she. It is not an easy choice, right? To take someone's life, to take your own life. Like, it's not. And I think about also the repercussions of choices that I might make and how they might affect others. You know what I mean? So my choice to exercise a level of agency that I feel as though is the last bit of agency that I got in this world might have dire consequences for those who I'm supporting. So that's part of the reason why in the book, you know, it opens up with saying about murder in my spirit. Like I couldn't do that again. And I chose not to that day because I didn't have to sacrifice murder in my spirit. I didn't have to murder my spirit to get home to somebody else, because nobody else was dependent upon me. And I consider that a level of privilege to let me think about death in ways that maybe other people wouldn't think about death. Because folks said I had a death wish. And according to the tradition, bitch, yes, you do. Because you know what it means to talk back to a body in blue. Because you know a body in blue is still a white hood. And I purposely, this is not a conflation of metaphors. This is not a conflation of subjectivities. Like, this is the recognition of the changing same. The same rhetoric and discourse that paddy wagoners and patrollers use to legitimate lynching is the same discourse that police use to legitimate police brutality, anti-Black police brutality.
Yeah, it's a complicated space when, like, there's the notion of subjection as survival, and this idea of, I love the idea, like you were talking about, like the afterlife and the energy and that knowledge and that memory, and also thinking about trauma. Where does that trauma go that inhabited your body? It would ripple out to your community.
I think it has to do with people. So we might not always testify for our shit, but we might observe and testify and speak on and record someone else's, right?
Yes.
So like when I talk about that energy also could be transmitted transmitted via like text. Someone who chose to remember me, who thought that my experience and my story, my narrative was significant enough to pass on knowledge to somebody else. Hey, you remember what happened to Earth? So you know what she chose to do. You might not want to go that way. You don't want to go the way of Earth. So maybe you want to go the way of Earth. Like either way, I think there's a power to it. And I guess maybe my experience on some levels has opened me up to consider how death can be a liberatory practice.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking to, how when lynching does not when lynching does not end in death, right? Like when this moment where the lynched body or the attempted lynched body survives, like what happens to that body? How does that body, kind of work through that trauma?
Yeah.
how does that body move in the world? Because in that moment, it's almost like a new making or remaking of the body in which you experience the world differently. You interact and become different, and you almost live in this elsewhere space where you have to sort of invent this new way of living and being beyond the way you understood and were in the world prior to your encounter, that failed lynching. I don't know if I was testifying or asking a question.
You were testifying and you were saying a lot of things that made me teary-eyed, so yes.
Love it. Well, in the spirit of testifying and witnessing, let's turn to some questions from our local audience, our digital audience. We have maybe time for 2 because we have a time crunch of 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Poppin'.
Go ahead. Oh, hi, Dr. Orr.
Hey, who are you?
Landy.
Hi, Landy. Oh, what's up, Landy?
I'm good. First, I want to say thank you for the transparency of your book, because I think that vulnerability is strength, and we can't just equate strength with blocking our emotions, but taking full control of those. So thank you. I also think that I'm angry right now, particularly just because of this verdict. And so even reading your book on the train last night, it took me there because I am angry and I don't care. And so I'm thinking, even in thinking about how you were talking about this rhetoric of lynching, right? And I don't think that Botham Jean's murder completely, aligns one-on-one with each, point that you point out. But just thinking about these ideas of citizenship and belonging, and how he didn't belong in his own home. I'm just thinking, have you identified some of this language? Like I said, even in my thinking, I'm like, okay, it doesn't, but I can't help but see the resonances of some of the, like I said, especially of the ideas of citizenship and belonging that you discuss. So I guess my question is a question, but it's also a contemplation.
I hear you. I'm walking right alongside you, baby. Real talk, I will, and again, in all transparency, and I will say this transparency gets me in trouble. So, I wouldn't have got snatched up if I hadn't been honest. So, I couldn't give my attention to the case because I had to be productive. I knew that I was going to find out the verdict at some point in time, and then I would find out the verdict. But I knew I couldn't watch it. I knew I couldn't give my attention. After they said that they were going to go for murder, I was like, oh shit. Will this be the first cop to actually get properly indicted for murder? Well, I can't get no attention because we know how this shit goes, and it's part of.
Same.
I can't have hope like that. I can just hope enough. And be like, oh, so they went with murder. We'll see how this goes. Like, okay, like I have to see how this plays out, because for me to be excited or for me to have any real hope that there's going to be justice,
Right.
What I can hope for though is that the case that's created and whatever success that it has, that it creates a foundation upon which justice can be established for later. Because I don't feel like it's going to be in the now. You know what I mean? I'm thinking about how this will attend to how we think about and think through white innocence.
Definitely.
The myth of white innocence is what I should say. So, Lanny, that was just me having a conversation with you, because
No, it's like I said, it wasn't even a question. It was almost a contemplation because I don't know how to feel. But yeah, besides that,
I think you feel the way you feel, baby, and your anger is hella warranted.
right.
It's warranted.
So I think we have another question.
Yes. Hello. Can you sleep? Wow.
Well, who are you, baby? Who are you?
My name is Jacoby. And so so in the beginning, you opened up talking about how you were stopped from using the word murder in the cases where there were, it's not meeting the legal standard for what a murder would be and so forth, right? So I was wondering, in one of your themes here, when you talk about American identity, like what it means to like have this burden of proof or evidence, and what that means when it comes to even us identifying as American, even though we're not one of them, like the people who came up with these ideas for state, for constitution. Why do we still subscribe to these ideas of proof and evidence? And at what point do we need to maybe kind of look at that? Or I'm sorry.
No.
No, I was gonna say, or should we weaponize it? Could that be something that we could turn and weaponize it against the very thing that is supposed to be a weapon against us?
And just remind me real quick, because I want to go back. Weaponize. What are we weaponizing specifically again?
Proof. So the fact that we can prove, yeah, because what I think what it does is that it's this objective space where even though we may not get it from a white person or in the eyes of this prudent person, but the science of it is the same regardless of who's gonna be determining where is a fact or not, right? And so what I'm saying, I guess, is that not every time you need to prove or evidence something that you're in this setting of like a court. And so I'm saying there are ways that we can weaponize proof and evidence. And, could that be a weapon that we could use against that system? I'm sorry.
No, I'm a little stuck, honestly. Yeah, I have to say I'm a little stuck. I'm a little stuck with where, I guess I'm stuck because I know that we always make this claim for belonging as a way to make an ethical argument, right, about humanity. And I get tired of arguing for my humanity.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because it's like, I know. But then I'm always put in these positions where I have to argue for that. And if I don't exercise the argument, if I don't try to argue that, if I don't try to make that clear, there's a lot of consequences and repercussions. So I feel like from a rhetorical standpoint, that's part of my rhetorical situation. It's not an expectation, but the burden of having to always, demonstrate my proof of belonging. Mm-hmm. I take that as, well, if I want to live here, if I want to be here, if I want to have less disruption, then at times where the inquiry is made, right, I have to be strategic about how I choose to respond. Mm-hmm. So on this one time, I was like, I'm tired. And we see what happens when bitches say they tired.
You picked the battle. It sounds like, and you know.
And see, I want to say the battle was picked because I no longer had a threshold for the bullshit. And everybody reaches a point, you know what I mean? Like, real talk in 2013, and y'all can talk to any of the senior folk, you know what I'm saying? Dr. E knows about this, Dr. Green knows about this. I think I might have shared some of these details with Gwen. Hey, G, sure knows this shit. He thinks I'm a little crazy anyway. But yeah, I had told folks in 2013, I'm gonna quit my job. I sold everything in my house in 2013 because I said, they're gonna set me up and turn me into the very thing they need to legitimate their bullshit. I'd be hella bad if I give them that satisfaction. I cannot give ASU, the university, the nation, a satisfaction on that has almost killed me because I'm going to end up in prison. If I stay at this university, I will end up in prison because I got plans. You know what I mean? I got plans, and they are fucking with my plans. And I mean, in the most outlandishly egregious ways that it's just like, wait a minute, you're sending me all these emails that are illegal. Like, you just gave me receipts. Wait a minute. If you're giving me the receipts, do the receipts not matter? Do they not have weight for me in the ways that I think they will have weight for me? Like, trying to figure out how the university works, right? In ways that I think that it's supposed to, but it doesn't, right? It has these rules, these policies, these procedures, but it circumvents them in all kind of ways because it's the nation and it can do that.
Right.
And I get snatched up in the whims of it. And so in 2013, I was like, I was done. Sold everything in my house, went to DC to finish an article in the National Mall, had an experience, long story short. This blonde man literally asked me to help him get to the feet of Lincoln. I have a whole nother section of this already written up, but a lot of people have heard this narrative. And it got to a point where it was just like, I was there in this moment of this 50th anniversary march in Washington, looking at a sea of Black folk, thinking, shit, this is what we do. If I quit, or if I end up making and blurring some people and making a video and posting all that shit, so when they say, is she crazy? No, this was all intentional. Like, she planned all this stuff. I mean, if anybody's ever seen Man on Fire, I was gonna be that bitch on fire. You feel me? Like, it was gonna be a beautiful fucking masterpiece. And I thought about, like, is that the way that I want to be remembered? Do I want to be remembered as the crazy Black bitch who went postal at the institute, the white institution, to legitimate a narrative as to why black women shouldn't be in academia or Black women shouldn't be in certain spaces, right? How will my action perpetuate and fuck shit up for other people? Like, that's a problem that I typically, a burden that I put on myself that I shouldn't always put on myself. So from 2013 to having that experience, to coming back, guns blazing, saying, you know what? I will not give them the satisfaction. I'll do X, Y, and Z. And I did that. I did X, Y, and Z. And right after I finished Z, history came in and said, all right, bitch, you done. We're going to smack you up. I mean, think about it. The very thing that you're sitting here trying to testify to that people are telling you doesn't really exist is the very thing that snatches you up. And you become your own case study.
Yeah.
And then you become your case study in ways that you've read things about the past and the history. And you've read that because from other people, because everybody else is dead. And you realize that you're alive. And you start thinking about all these other things that you couldn't think about because you hadn't been touched in this way before. Touched in this way that connects you to a history that you already knew you were a part of, but yet.
Yeah, it's intense. So I want to say thank you for one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
I guess to use your phrase, thanks for walking with us.
Yes.
Copy that.
Thanks for allowing us to walk with you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, this was incredible. And thank you for your transparency, your honesty, your fire,
Your vulnerability.
your vulnerability.
The vulnerability, that was so strong.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Calvin. I appreciate that much.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap it up. I'd like to say thanks to DBLAC, to Lou and Kirsten for making this happen.
Yes.